I think you could kick us off, Des.
Okay. Heke te iura ki wetawera iti. Papa te wharitiri ki runga tākau runga. Pāpaki kauana nā tai ki te reinga. Ka pō ka ao kawa te hei maui ora. Nā reira koutou e to motu. Koutou e whakarongo mai e mātakitaki mai ki tēnei pai kōrero. Nau mai hara mai. Ki tēnei hui I wainganui a tātou. Te mea tūtahi ana ki a rātou ko hinga, ko haere, ki te tua tarārai. Nā reira koutou te hunga mate, koutou te hunga wairua, nā haere koutou. Ana waihotia, koutou I a mātou te hunga. Nā reira, hunga ora, nā reira, haere. Ana ka huri, tēnei a mātou o te pai kōrero, ana te mihi kia nā wahine kōrua, ana no kaitahu, whiti atu kia Ngāti Kuia, ana ko koutou te waka o Maui, ana te waipaunamu, ana huri noa kia o mātou hoa, ana ko koe mana no nā mautere, e roto te moana nui a kiwa, hā moa, nā reira, tēnei hoki koutou e te motu, e te ao, tēnei mātou he kōrero mo nā take nui mo ngai tātou, nā kaihea te kaupapa, mo te mātai tūwhina, mo ngai tātou, nā reira, kārunu nā kōrero, te mea nui ana, ko tai mai rā koutou ke tea, ke te whakarongo o mātou kōrero. Tēnei te mihi kia kōrua nā kaiwhakahaere o te New Zealand Archaeological Society. Nā reira, nā mihi nui ko koutou e whakatū nei pai kōrero, tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Nā reira, koutou e mātakitaki e whakarongo, tēnei te mihi kia koutou, ana kahuri e nei wahanga. Nā reira, kia koe, Patricia.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Des. Kia ora koutou, everyone. He mihi mahana nei kia koutou katoa. Ko wai tākare te pai maunga, ko wai tamata te moana, I tupu ake au I titirangi, e wehe oku te puna I Inia. Ko Patricia Pile toku ingoa. Ko te pai papaho pāpuri kairuruku o te New Zealand Archaeology Association ahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. A warm greetings to you all this evening. I'm Patricia Pillay and I recently completed my master's in archaeology at the University of Auckland in Tamaki Makaurau, and I'm the social media coordinator for the New Zealand Archaeology Association. I have the pleasure of chairing this important kōrero on behalf of NZAA this evening, which is being recorded. It is extremely humbling to facilitate this kōrero during Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Week as well. Kia kaha Te Reo Māori. Our discussion this evening will be focused on representation in archaeology in Aotearoa New Zealand, and to some extent the Pacific. We are fortunate enough today to have with us 4 speakers who are experienced Indigenous heritage and archaeology professionals with diverse research and career backgrounds. Before we meet our speakers, just a brief introduction to this event. This kōrero has stemmed from multiple conversations and inspiration given the recent global events regarding archaeology and heritage in the wider political climate and the need to sustain and engage and encourage uncomfortable conversations around representation in archaeology and embrace the discomfort and listen and learn from this kōrero. It is also relevant to the NZAA's 5-year strategic plan, which is updated regularly and guides the current and future direction of the Archaeology Association here in Aotearoa. However, the issues discussed today are not new, and it is acknowledged that these are long-standing conversations, some of which have been addressed in various kaupapa, which we will highlight in many of the questions discussed here in this evening. The way the panel will run is that there are a preset of questions I will put forth to our panelists, and they will have an open discussion, and nearing the end of the discussion around 7:45 p.m, we will have an opportunity for questions from the attendees, which will be put through to our webinar host, Zach McIver, and you can just use the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom panel to submit your questions, and Zach will facilitate these questions to me. This discussion will progress quite quickly, but I'm now going to introduce our panelists and begin our discussion. So our first panelist, who also introduced us today kindly, is Dr. Des Kahotea, who operates as a professional in Maori heritage based on archaeology, anthropology, and cultural history. Des works mainly in the area of heritage under the Resource Management Act 1993 and Pohera Taonga Act 2014, Treaty of Waitangi Claims, Hearings, and Settlement, and more recently, the Takutai Moana Claims. Des is active in the area of indigenous archaeology at an international level, attending and presenting at conferences on this topic in association with other indigenous archaeologists. Des is an associate research fellow in anthropology at Waikato University and currently teaches a summer semester paper at stage 3 and 4 titled Maori Heritage with the anthropology department. Most of Des's work is with Maori community with either hapu or iwi. So kia ora, Des.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Gena Moses is our second panelist today, and Gena is the Potaki lead kaitiaki or general manager of Hokai Nuku, which is a collaboration of iwi and hapu, providing cultural advice on the Puhoi to Wellsford roading projects. Gena has been involved in the establishment and operations for the last 10 years, and she has learned on the job and then trained and mentored kaitiaki for most of this time. Gena has a background in whānau and hapu development in the public service, which naturally led to heritage and environmental management and treaty settlements. Gena says it's all about tino rangatiratanga. Kia ora, Gena. So Rachel Wesley is staunchly Kai Tahu and grew up in her Ho Kaika traditional village at Otago on the Otago Peninsula. Rachel studied archaeology at Otago and is currently undertaking a PhD there, investigating how different perceptions of ecological knowledge can contribute to understanding resource use by Southern Māori in Murihiku. Rachel has been involved with fieldwork at Wahitupuna throughout her tribal area over the last 20 years. However, over the last few years, she's mostly focused on the Papa Nui Inlet, a site of much importance to her hapu. Rachel was the curator Māori at Otago Museum, leaving there earlier this year for a very brief stint at Dunedin City Council. She has recently taken up the role of chief executive at Akaha Ltd, Mana Whenua-owned consultancy in Dunedin, which often works with Otago-based archaeologists on behalf of Mana Whenua. And lastly but not least, Mana Laumea is a Samoan New Zealander who is raised in Tamaki Makaurau. Mana is experienced contract archaeologist, which has been his profession for several years now, working in the Waikato, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, and Auckland. And Mana has also been involved in academic work in Samoa since 2014. Mana is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Auckland and is investigating changes in Samoan agriculture and social organization. An aspect of Mana's research interrogates links between negative ethno-historic narratives and archaeological interpretations in Samoan and Pacific contexts. Many of these narratives are pervasive and reflect larger disciplinary imbalances that privilege certain types of knowledge while disempowering others. Mana views improved Indigenous acknowledgement, engagement, and training as a key issue in Aotearoa and the broader Pacific if we wish to create knowledge that holds meanings for more communities. Kia ora, Rachel, kia ora, Mana. And so with that is our panel today, and you can already see the diverse range of expertise. So just to kick off the panel, before we go into the sub-questions, I thought we'd start by introducing yourselves in specifically how did you get into archaeology? And we'll start with Des and then follow on Gena, Mana, and then Rachel.
Kia ora. I got a bit of story, but early 70s, I was working at Horatiu. I worked with a lot of people, males from Turanga Waiwai Marae, and they had an active carving group going, and then I was always interested in that, and then I tapped into that, and there was a group of us in Hamilton, and I had, you know, learning about carving, you know, the tradition and the Waikato tradition, and it was based on tapu. And then I sort of started, you know, going to museums and looking at stuff, you know, just doing personal research and exploration. And I met Dante. A lot of you know Dante. He was at the Waikato Museum. So he used to show me a lot, you know, behind the scenes. And then by the mid-70s, I thought, I applied for a job at Waikato Museum, and then, you know, was overlooked. So I said, oh, well, I'll go to university. You know, and go via there, because I thought I'd make a good career. So I had a friend in Auckland, Aotearoa, and he said, oh, go and see Harry Allen. And then so I popped up Harry Allen, and then he was living in Picton Street. And then he took me, he convinced me to enroll because I already had half a degree in archaeology. And that's how it happened. At that stage, you know, this is late 70s, early 80s, most of the museum people were archaeologists. You had Stuart Park, who was the director then at Auckland. And as you know, a lot of those who work at museums, there's a big background of people. And then after I finished, I went right up to my master's, and then I did a museum internship with the Smithsonian straight after, a couple of weeks after I handed in my master's. Then I ended up at the Bishop Museum with Sonoto. Then all the archaeologists, they knew I was a student of Roger Green. They couldn't understand why I was in anthropology, you know, working with the collections. But at the Smithsonian, I clicked that most of the people who work in museums have an anthropology background. It was just a particular a twist in Aotearoa here that, you know, they archaeologists, a lot of archaeologists end up as curators in that. So, yeah, that's my background. After that, I must mention, and I reflect as quite important. So I just came back about 2 weeks. I spent a couple of years in the States. Tamaiti from Ruatoki, we've known each other since we're, you know, in our late teens, and he heard I was back, and then Mahurahuri of Ruatoki, they were objecting to the Tūhoe Trust cutting down native vegetation and bush and trees and shrubs to plant in pine, and it's their maunga rich whaiarahia. So I turned up there, and then I ended up with them occupying, but it was great because one of the key tame got me to look at. So with all the forestry, with all the fire breaks and that, I picked up a lot of sites, saw a lot of power, and they gave me a lot of kōrero, and I did a bit of a report, and that's the first cultural assessment at Aotearoa. And it was interesting because I think it was really good that I combined archaeology and what I called in the report the kākahu, you know, the kōrero of Tūhoe. So that was my, but I received a lot of kickback from that, from the archaeological community, but I'll possibly discuss that later on. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko kura haupo tu waka ko Ngāti Kuia te iwi pākohi, ko Gena Moses-Te Kani ahau. So I'm not an archaeologist, I am a kaitiaki for my people in Ngāti Kuia, and also I work for Ngāti Whātua and Ngāti Manuhiri in Auckland. I started off, so first of all I bow to Des, who's like our walking history in action. I've learned from lots of interesting people, and Dante is definitely one of those people I've learned from, Dante Bonica. During our treaty settlements, we wanted to achieve the same status with Pākohe, Argilite, as Ngāi Tahu has with Pounamu. And so I developed a Pakohi management plan similar to the Pounamu management plan. And at that point, we were all about revival of practice rather than protection of wahi tupuna. But actually, I learnt heaps just by hanging out with the archaeologists, the doc archaeologists in particular, and Dante, about the balance between protecting wahi tupuna and maintaining traditional practice. And some of that work has led me into other iwi environmental work. So I work in far from Te Waipounamu in Puhoi as well. So.
Yeah, I think I don't really know why I ended up doing archaeology. I finished high school when I went travelling, and I had to come home early and I didn't have anything to do, so I went to university and ended up in archaeology somehow. But I think I'd always been interested in where my ancestors had come from in Samoa, and I felt that learning about the past in Samoa was a good way to sort of, I guess, connect to my own heritage. So I've been fortunate enough to work with people who have research projects over there over the last few years, and I've been able to go over and do some work and research in Samoa. And yeah, it's been really good. You kind of figure out as you go through university and then come out into professional archaeology as well that there's good aspects to it and other aspects that need improving. So I think it's been interesting to see that kind of develop over time. And I've had a lot of time to reflect this year, starting my PhD and taking some specific studies papers and seeing some of the same issues from a different angle. So yeah, sort of developing those thoughts at the moment, and I think it's a really good time to have this talk. So happy to be here.
Kia ora. Yeah. Rachel? Well, I think Rachel, if you could share, how did you get into archaeology? Oh, I think Rachel's just having a bit of technical trouble on Zoom.
Yeah, I think Rachel may have dropped out. Hopefully she comes back in. I'll let her in when she comes back.
That's all right. Just while we wait for Rachel, then it's a nice segue just to follow on from that. What has helped you get to where you are, and what advice do you have for others who want to set off in a similar direction? And maybe we'll start with Gena and then work through Mana and then Des, and then hopefully Rachel can join us.
I have learned everything I know on the job by hanging out with really cool people like Des. And so there are lots of people who are there to help and support us and give us a kick up the bum as we go through our process. And when I started with our Pakohi management plan, we wanted to quarry Pakohi in traditional Pakohi quarry sites. And so we were exploring those kind of conversations because we wanted access to really good quality stone for traditional practice. And I suppose we just learned through very clever people about the preciousness of what we had left. And when I was young, you'd go to Canterbury Museum and you saw this disgusting display of traditional peoples harvesting Pakohi and what they thought was how they did it at the time. And it used to upset me a lot because we looked like Neanderthals. So I'm not sure who created that, but I'm not quite as old as Des, but a long time ago when you would go to Canterbury Museum, that's what we thought was happening with our people in Waido. And so you have a particular perception about how all of that is going. And then on my journey, so I accidentally met Dante Bonica, and he started me off on a journey of finding really good quality stone close to Waihi Tupuna, discovering cultural landscapes of our Waihi Tupuna, seeing the full occupation in the landscape still to this day of Pakohi quarries, and being able to share that joy and passion with our people. And so we run through Ngāti Kuia, we run wānanga every year, and that's part of my journey, is also sharing it with everybody else as we've learned things, sharing it. Like, we're only one step. I feel like I'm only ever one step ahead of all of my whanaunga as I teach them about what I can see in the landscape and what the precious tonga we have. So I'm not sure if I answered that question.
Oh, I think, no, that was perfect. Yeah, it sounds like it's really important to learn by meeting interesting people along the way as well. Oh, wonderful. We've got Rachel who has joined with us. So before we move on to the panelists to answer this question, I'll just get Rachel, if you could just introduce yourself and how did you get into archaeology?
Kia ora, ko Pukekura te mauka, ko tākau te awa e rere ana, ko tamatea te whare, ko kai te pahi te hapu, kai tahu te iwi, no tākau ahau, ko Rachel Wesley taku ingoa. So kia ora everyone, sorry for that, having massive technology issues at the moment. I sort of kind of fell, I don't know if I fell into archaeology or whether I was kind of guided there. Sort of grew up in my hau kāinga at Ōtākau, and had been hugely influenced by my paua, my grandfather, and other kaumātua at Ōtākau during the 80s and 90s, and was often sort of taken around some of the Waihi Tupuna on Otago Peninsula, and shown places where people had come in the 1920s, 30s and 40s and ransacked our Waihi Tupuna for, you know, the tauka tūturu and koiwi tangata, and taken them to Otago Museum mostly. And so I was sort of raised with that and the idea that that there needed to be someone to sort of look out for our past and to protect our tauka and our history. As I grew older, Gerard O'Regan was at Otago Museum working as a liaison officer, and I just kind of sort of fell alongside him. Was at university, was actually studying community and family studies rather than anthropology. Had to do an anthropology paper, became quite enamored with it, changed my major, fell in with Gerard, and Gerard sort of influenced and helped support me hook up with archaeologists working for Ngāi Tahu and getting me onto fieldwork and excavations. So from there it's just sort of carried on, and I've gone away and done other things, and I've come back to it, and I've gone away and come back to it. So yeah, it's been a really, really long journey, and still going. So, kia ora.
Kia ora, Rachel, and we'll come back to you, Rachel, to answer this first question, but maybe Mana, if you want to address what helped you get to where you are and any advice you have for people who want to set off in a similar direction, and then Des, and then back to Rachel.
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably also similar to what Gena said, I think, just lots of great people along the way who have lots of knowledge, and coming through university, and even just friends, people you study with, and then also working with people in the field, just had some really great advice from people. Also mentors who, you know, taught me practical things about how to work in the industry, invaluable knowledge. So I think that's probably been the biggest help for me to get where I am at the moment. And yeah, I think if for other people coming through, I just recommend talking to people, you know, sharing ideas, being open. I think that's the best way to go about it.
Okay, thank you, Mana. Des?
Okay. Too many people to anybody who shared knowledge, Maori or Pākehā, you know, and I think that's really the sharing of knowledge. People are open to giving it. That's really important. But I've just been thinking about it, but when I go back to it when I was a student, what was really queer, was important were two queer or two elderly aunties, grand-aunts. They were a sister to my grandfather on my mother's side, and one who is a neighbour where I'm living now, first cousin to my grandfather. And as part of a chitanga is what I call today wairua safety. You know, I sort of come from a background and era, you know, dealing with wahi tupuna, you're dealing with a lot of tapu. So you need to take care of your personal safety. And I call it wairua safety. So it's something I learned from carving is that, so I used to talk to these grand aunts, these queer, let them know where I was going, what I was doing. They were really interested. And then they'll say the whole point of it is that their thoughts with you protects you. And one particular, my grandfather's sister lived in kōrero, and she had raised my mother, and then she was really interested, and I took her out to the sites with her mokopunas, and then she related because her the great uncle she married, who came from Aotearoa Te Teko, was a farm worker. When I was, you know, Ian, Lola, and a few others, you know, was a 2-3 year project with Auckland University had at kōrero. And then, so I used to take them around and other people, and then they'll get quite excited, but this grand aunt really appreciated me showing in the excavation and then taking her over the place, because she used to go with her grand uncle she was married to on a horse when he was the shepherd on the block, was the Lands of Survey block, and then they were aware of all these wahi tupuna. And then when she saw the excavation and I explained to her, and then she related a lot of stuff to me. But when I mentioned Tamaiti and the Mahuruhure had invited me to Ruatoki, so when I go to other iwi places, I go and see these aunties, and then especially going to Tūhoe and Ruatoki, and then Emera, that was the queerest name, she said, oh, her younger sister, Roha, was adopted by, you know, by Karaua in Ruatoki, and she's buried at Ruakirikiri. And to me, I got a blood there, and she'll look after me. And then so I had no trouble. But that was, yeah, and they were quite. And then when I went away to the Smithsonian, I came back, and then they got older, and then, you know, over time. But that thing, I think what's really being important is people I can talk things through. You know, anything that you have to address.
Kia ora, Des. Yeah, I think what you said about shared knowledge and people that you can talk to, that's really, really important. And Rachel, what are your thoughts?
Around what's helped me to get where I am and thoughts for people entering into this area, I suppose. What's helped me mostly is having, again, really good support and having a number of archaeologists who were working for my iwi, and so, you know, they weren't kaitahu, but, you know, were working for the iwi and were able to sort of help bridge that divide between cultural values and tikanga and an archaeological perspective on things. Yeah, there's not that many, you know, same across the country, but sometimes it seems really sort of, really, I don't know, extremely visible down here, and that, you know, there's just not many Māori working in archaeology or cultural heritage down here at all. And so being able to sort of connect with those people who were able to support me as, you know, a young Māori person, and to be able to, you know, express how I felt about it and tie that back to how my hapu and my iwi felt about it was really, really invaluable. And then I suppose, just being really bullheaded about what I wanted to do. You know, there's a lot of push, you know, within your wider whānau and hapu to go down particular tracks, and archaeology was never ever one of them. You know, they'd push you, you know, why don't you go and look after the rivers and look after the lakes? What are you doing, looking after all these things that, you know, that no one's interested in apart from these bloody people who work in museums and dig things up? But just being bullheaded and passionate about it, and to the point where it's sort of everyone else sort of starts getting a little bit excited about what you're excited about, has really helped as well. It ends up building up its own sort of support by default. So I suppose advice for those who want to set off into this field is don't let your passion for it die, I suppose. Yeah, if you're starting out at university, I found it really hard as an undergrad, just doing theory, and a lot of it was just seemed totally irrelevant to my understanding of the past, as you know, as Māori, as kaitahu. But just being able to persist past that, just, you know, being able to, you know, keep hold of that passion for what you're doing, and just not get bogged down in all the other stuff that's of no relevance to you as Māori. Yeah.
I really like what you said about being bullheaded and sort of sparking your passion to inspire others. And it really does seem, from what everyone said, that having this really good support network and growing that support network seems to be really key. This ties in quite nicely to the second question, which is what would have made things easier for you when you first embarked on your career in archaeology, heritage management as well? And we hear a lot of generalizations on social media and in the news, of course, and how people fall into this sector. What are the challenges you have faced, you know, going into this career? And I think we'll start with Mana, this question, and then go to Des, and then come back to Rachel, and then finish with Gena.
Cool. Yeah, I think like Rachel was saying, you know, coming through university, sometimes it was hard to, I mean, especially as an undergraduate student, hard to actually know what archaeology was. And then even when you've been through, you're just kind of like, well, you know, I'm still trying to figure it out. And then when you get there, it's like, well, it's not actually what I thought it was. So there wasn't much practical guidance. It was mostly theory, university, and then the onus was on the students to go out and get the experience themselves. And then I think at university, there's not much self-reflection in terms of the discipline too. So just where it's come from historically, and how that structures the way we talk about archaeology. So I felt that now I'm sort of having to relearn a lot of things from different perspectives, and that's been a bit of an obstacle for me this year. So I think that's the biggest challenge I've had coming through. Yeah.
Right, my turn. Okay, so I suppose what would have made things easier at the beginning, to be honest, having more Māori in this field would have been a massive help. Yeah, I went through most of my undergrad and then beyond as the only actively Māori student in the department. I mean, actively Māori, I did slowly find other Māori students, but they weren't Māori in the same way I am. And, you know, I was. It's hard to sort of explain, you know, that it was something that you had to sort of like tease out rather than like, hey, kia ora, I'm here. And I suppose, yeah, I suppose a lot of it is quite university based in terms of just the university having the structures and supports within the department around supporting, you know, students that weren't Pākehā, so to speak. Didn't see many others, you know, whether they were Pacifica or Māori at all. And yeah, and I suppose from a more practical experience, if I had done more social anthropology and sort of learned more of those theoretical foundations that would have enabled me to sort of articulate how I was feeling in a way that academics understood. If you yeah, sort of understand what I'm saying. It wasn't until I sort of got to fourth year and started to learn about various things, you know, like post-colonialism, etc., that actually gave me the words to be able to talk about how I felt with how archaeology represented not just Māori, but, you know, all indigenous pasts and the way that it's interacted with as a discipline. Yeah, I think that's probably about it.
It's a hard question for me because I never saw a career. I mean, late 80s. Things have changed, you know, with the, there was the whole Labour government led change in the economy, and then so a lot of work, survey work, all sorts of work, it sort of disappeared, and job change, you know, and then they, you had the formation of DOC, things tightened up in a lot of areas. So I didn't really see, you know, I didn't really pursue it, but I had a late 80s teaching and research fellowship at Waikato University, where I taught a paper, and I worked on wahi tapu for the city, Hamilton City District Council, and I hooked up with a local elder there, Roro Puke, and then we sort of worked together. He was quite, yeah, he's what you call, he was a matakete and I was the archaeologist, and we had a good, he was right into preserving heritage, especially wahi tupuna. Yeah, wahi tapu, and then yeah, it was really interesting. But I think in 1990, when I was there at the Waikato, I did this study tour in England. I thought, well, I'll go back to where Pākehās come from and see how they manage heritage. And then so the heritage management, their courses were just starting to emerge. So this is 1990, and then I looked at some of the early programs. University of, I was based at University of Newcastle upon Tyne, and then I went to 2 or 3 other places, but and then with the RMA, things are opened up a bit, but that was sort of, you know, this is early 90s, and then I was based in Tauranga where I was, and then, yeah, no, it's sort of quite difficult, but what I did in 1994 in Warrangambili was the regional archaeologist. I did an appeal against Historic Places Trust for, they gave a developer 26, authority to destroy 26 archaeological sites. You know, they identified them as Midden, and that's Papua War. That's where my name Kahotea comes from, my tupuna. So I went and did an appeal. So that was upset number 2 to a lot of people in the fraternity. But it's doing that appeal, I had to do homework, had to mediate, but it really, there was a period that it really set me on the pathway I'm on now. So, and at the same time, I was doing treaty waitangi claims and using my archaeology background. You know, mapping, understanding landscape, and through the treaty claims is dealing with who are the, it's about tupuna on the land. It's not about whakapapa, you know, relationships. It's about who Rachel talks about mana, is about where do we get our mana from the land. And being an archaeologist, I was able to see sites I could connect to it straight away. I don't know where I went to on that.
I'm just following on from Des, because I think that part of the journey that I've had has also been treaty settlements, and so in treaty settlements, you meet lots of really interesting researchers. But we developed this model following on from what Des said, which is tangata whenua, mana whenua, mana tangata pūtātaki, and it's a way of looking at places and telling a story about places, particularly focused on sort of wahi tupuna when we've been doing our cultural effects assessments. And I bow to Des as being the creator of a whole lot of these things. But well, I know we're in a creative space, and I think when I started, basically we had to create everything all over again. And some of it is because we're not as well networked up as we possibly should be. Even though when it comes to iwi environmental management, there's lots of us doing it in lots of places, but we're not very well resourced and we're not very well connected. And I spent a lot of time growing kaitiaki, and there isn't a real job. There isn't a real career as a kaitiaki. And not all kaitiaki want to be archaeologists or heritage managers or even environmental managers. But it's a precious skill that we give to our whoever's going to be the kaitiaki. And I have kaitiaki that range from their 60s through to their late teens. Is that I learnt from kaumātua, and everything I learn, I'm always teaching, and I want them to share and grow that, and I want that to become some kind of career. And so I've been working with Des and some other Maori archaeologists to see how we can do that, grow kaitiaki. Kaitiaki-tanga has been a valid career in heritage management and all those sorts of things, and how we can maybe bring some of your mātauranga westernized university into our world so that they connect up. But we don't need to get too overwhelmed by, the sort of, maybe the theory, because I am deeply concerned about the amount of theory that happens at a university before you even touch dirt. Anyway, touch dirt, be a kaitiaki. That's my answer.
I love that. It's just something that's really awesome. Yeah, growing the kaitiaki would definitely help, I think. And also, I really like what Rachel said as well about having that vocabulary as well to express yourself. This ties in quite nicely into the next question, and this is sort of where you, as panelists, you can jump in and interject where you like. What are the main areas of bias in New Zealand archaeology that you come across all the time? And I think we'll start off with Mana, this one, and then feel free to jump in.
Well, I guess I'll probably actually speak in reference to Samoa more than New Zealand for this question. And I think the main area of bias is just the absolute lack of Samoans doing archaeology. There are none. Like, there's maybe 3 other people I can think of off the top of my head that have a master's qualification in archaeology. And basically almost none of them are really doing research in Samoa. So everyone doing research in that area or in the Pacific, most of those people are Pawanese, and there's no real Samoan voice. And I feel that because of that, the stories we tell maybe aren't that relevant to the people in Samoa and people in the Pacific, and a lot of it's locked behind technical jargon too. So I think that that kind of bias, where certain people are telling our past, is sort of limiting the potential of archaeology in that area.
I know what you're talking about. My pet thing is the archaeological provisions of the Tauhera Taonga Act, or used to be the Historic Places Act, and then I did Foucaultian genealogy of how it come about, and then I mentioned the early 90s when I had I did an appeal against an authority, against Historic Places Trust, and then I sort of had to dig into what's it all about, where's the culture in it, because my argument against the destruction of the site was the cultural element. Then I quickly cottoned on that it ain't about culture, it's about science. And then so I early 90s, I looked back in, dug into the NZAA newsletters, and then I saw a trail for the lobbying to get it into legislation to get protection for archaeological sites, because up till the 1975 there was no protection for archaeological sites. And then seeing Roger Green a whole lot of people, NZAA, pushing the science. And one of Roger Green's in '63, his pet thought was, you know, it's protecting the archaeological record, you know. And then I thought, well, for a Maori perspective, the value of a place, a site has been there, been in existence, has not been in a report. And then to me, that has given control and authority to archaeologists about Maori heritage. So, and because it's we have separate legislation, you know, the Heritage Act and the RMA Act. You know, to me, it's a big issue. It's about you know, culture should be included into the scientific paradigm. Is Rachel off the line, is she?
Gena, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I'm not quite sure about the question, other than to say that my experiences, I've worked in two kind of areas where we've got commercial destruction of archaeology, and there's definitely a bias there that they are the scientists and we are the kaitiaki, and it's that we've developed mechanisms to protect wāhi tupuna without invasive investigation, and it doesn't appear to be as well supported in legislation for a start. It's been relationship based, but I know through my work with Department of Conservation and also on our roading project, that kind of protectionism that, and I almost feel like unless you find a really good archaeological partner, it's been about archaeological destruction. So when I started in the Pūhoi to Walk With project, I was told by an archaeologist that don't worry about it, it's all going to go. And that was before I even started. We'll investigate it, but don't worry about it, it's going to go. And actually through our project, we've managed to change that way of working and protect wāhi tupuna. Not all of it, heaps of it has gone, unfortunately, but we've been able to protect whole landscapes, and hopefully we'll be able to restore them. And I think it's a whole different way of working. It's not yet in any kind of legislation to help us do it, but I think it's an area that I really want us to explore. Off tangent, sorry about that.
No, really. But another way to, another question that I think is similar, but also slightly different, that follows on is, what are common misconceptions people have then, and how can we combat these misconceptions and communicate more effectively? Des, would you like to start this one off?
I actually live in my own world in this field, but going years back, even before I became a student, Maori saw archaeologists as playing with bones, so it was really negative. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was a student, and I'll be working Rotorua and a couple of other places, and I come across people, they were sort of give me a sort of twist their head a bit and look at me sideways. So I don't really know what the current feeling is, and I think over time people sort of change attitudes. Yeah.
Mana, do you want to add to that, and then hopefully Rachel can join through, and then Gena?
Sorry, I've been dealing with a sad dog outside crying. So, misconceptions. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have too much to say about this one, to be honest. I guess it's misconceptions about archaeology. I think the best way to alleviate that is to sort of have more community engagement with people, and also to for archaeologists to look at themselves and see how we can, I guess, communicate better with people, maybe get our ideas across better, but also think about the ideas we have too, to, you know, and talk to other communities as well to improve the way we do things. I think it's a better way to sort of improve the way we're perceived by the general public, maybe, and other people that engage with archaeologists.
Awesome. Rachel, are you with us?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still having technological issues, but at least I can
Awesome.
talk. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I suppose common misconceptions. Yeah, agreeing with what Mana said about that communication and so on. When I was working at the Otago Museum, I used to get some really wicked misconceptions coming, both from the kaitahu community and then from the wider community here in Otago as well. So from my own community, there was often a misconception that by working in archaeology, that I was actually, you know, that I was somehow colonized into thinking, you know, that by the very nature of being an archaeologist, that I had, you know, some really weird ideas around our cultural history. And so it was often quite, you know, a bit of hard work at times trying to, you know, to push that just because I'm an archaeologist doesn't mean that I am totally anti or not understanding of our tribal histories. There's a real sort of dichotomy around, you know, belief systems in terms of that sort of stuff. So either, you know, you're a complete traditionalist from a kaitahu perspective, or, you know, you're sucked into all that, you know, people arrived here in 1350, blah, 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 which sometimes doesn't quite fit with our narratives of what happened, you know, and how things went before 1769. The other misconception that I was alluding to was often from, I don't know how to describe them, probably the more redneck element of our community, I should say, where there was a whole sort of idea that archaeologists were into hiding the real past. I mean, we all know this, you know, skeletons in the closet type thing. So quite often, while I was working at the museum, I'd often be contacted by people sort of demanding to know where we were hiding the real stuff. And so just trying to, you know, combat those myths. I mean, this is something as, you know, archaeologists we see and hear all the time. So yeah, just communication and just trying to push and counter those stupid things that get put forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. And oh, yep, go Des.
Yeah, no, I've just thought of something. It's quite interesting. Is that go back to the early 90s. When I've worked as an archaeologist, I've had a contract with something, and from that time, I've always liked to put a cultural context. I say who the hapu is, who the iwi, and a little bit of kōrero, a little bit of history. And then I had reaction from iwi say, "Oh, you can't do that," you know. And even being employed by iwi and hapu, and I've got to be the archaeologist. I can't stray into history, kōrero. And I said, that's my archaeology. And I said, I'm not backing down. I says, if you wanted an archaeologist, you go get a Pākehā. But you know that they just thought, and I think it's the development that's come from the RMA, where archaeologists and people who deal with cultural issues, they separated, or the field was separated into archaeological assessments and cultural assessments. But to me, I see no sense in that. And then it's really important to put a people cultural context.
Yep, and I totally want to back that, Des. I think there's this perception that the archaeologists are the real science, and the kaitiaki, or the cultural perspectives, even mātauranga Māori is not a real science. So there's that one of the things I've observed is when we've created a partnership with between kaitiaki and archaeologists, the great things that we can create and co-write together. So I think what you've all said is about communications, but maybe it's the way we can, not just the words that we're saying, but actually communicating in partnership. So there's also this kind of perception that I see in the commercial archaeology world that archaeologists are the route to get to the Maori, to get to the whoever, the tangata whenua of that place. And in some ways that sets people up to be in an unsafe place. And I suppose that's just one of the things I was thinking about, that as an archaeologist, as a growing archaeologist, it's one of those things to be having really good collaboration and really good partnerships, but also having tangata whenua speak for themselves is a really important part of that process. So that I know that we've all talked about that balance between the mātauranga Māori or tangata Pacifica and our science worldview, having the balance and the collaboration and how we write those together as well is really cool.
Kia ora, yeah, thanks. Thank you, Gena. Yeah, what everyone said, really what you've summarized with communicating in partnership, that's a really good point. And actually nicely following on from this, and you've all sort of touched on this a little bit, how would you reconcile then the multiple, sometimes conflicting interests of different stakeholders? Rachel, we'll start with you and then go through to Mana and then Gena and then Des.
That's a really hard one, and struggle with that on an everyday basis in my job right now. So I suppose I take the view, first and foremost, of mana whenua, and I don't know that I reconcile the conflicting interests that are often presented to us, rather than just this is how it is, especially in terms of RMA type things. We don't want the site destroyed or modified, and so on and so forth. We want to be a part of it, of any decisions around management of site or taonga tūturu that are discovered, and we want to say in the interpretation of anything that is unearthed. So I suppose, I'm not really a good one to answer that because, don't really reconcile. I bulldoze.
I love it, bulldozing.
Yeah, I think I don't really have too much to add, to be honest. I think system reform is the only way to really sort of get any reconciliation in this circumstance. And I don't know how you do that. So but obviously having these conversations is one step in the right direction. So I get more of this kind of stuff, and then hopefully in the long term, you can make changes in legislation or that kind of thing to, I guess, bring things together and unison more.
I found an issue people raised earlier about communicating, really communicating information to people. And they, and able in a medium that they can understand. And most of the time is sort of deal with, say, with property owners, farmers and stuff like that, and they mainly all park out, and they're all different. But what I found over the years is that when I was doing I did a massive settlement pattern study, 3 months field survey over area, and in the area where I could get an endorsement from Historic Places Trust and I can go on to private property. But I never was challenged, and people, farmers, the property owners will freak when they see me as a Maori. But I just talk with them, and because I suppose I was younger and passionate, and then they picked up on that. But what I found, and then so when I was doing RMA stuff, in the 90s is that the younger Pākehā, they were interested. The older Pākehā weren't interested in, you know, they just, oh yeah, what's this, all this Maori stuff. But the younger Pākehā generation, they were, you know, could talk with them and communicate. And then so with a lot of my RMA, I'm as an archaeologist, I have different hats on, and I found that you just got to explain to people, you got to communicate to them, you know, to get them on the, you know, so everybody's on the same page.
Yep, I think I spent a lot of, most of my time is managing stakeholders, whether it's with Ngāti Kuia or whether it's with my project up in Auckland and Puhoi. And I kind of use that technique that Des was talking about, which is where you bring the culture or the story or the history into real people. And so to engage anybody in any of the things that we're doing, I always start with a long story of how we got here and what we've got and what I'm protecting, what I'm the kaitiaki of, why it's important to me. And depending on the situation, also making sure I bring in wairua as well. I think that wairua safety, that's nice, I like that. We actually do it as part of our health and safety workshops with folk, is about actually, so when you are in my place and you are going to do this investigation, these are the things that you may experience because you are disturbing them. And these are the cultural practices we use to keep ourselves safe, and this is how we keep you safe. And we do that with machine operators, all sorts of people, because we're all people, and there's different ways of connecting to all the different stakeholders, even if it's the person that's waving the checkbook trying to get us to hurry along. It's I feel like a baby Des, and I tell a lot of stories.
Oh, great. And so this another question from our responses as well was the poll. How would we tackle well-meaning organizations or initiatives without leading into the issue of tokenism? And I think this time we'll start with Gena, and then go to Des, and then Rachel, and then Mana.
Well, I'm probably not the best person to talk to about this because I say no a lot. And I possibly go into things thinking no first. So when I experience tokenism and institutional racism, which is a daily thing that we experience, particularly in construction, I'm not sure if I really understand the question on how to well-meaning organizations might open the door, but unless I say, actually, no, that's not it, this is the real thing, and I am usually quite firm about what my expectations are as tangata whenua or mana whenua, because opening the door just a little bit is still institutional racism. Something like that.
I think I'm not working with, you know, especially with RMA, it's been around for getting, you know, well over 20 years. If councils and property owners and consultants and developers and archaeologists haven't got a handle on it, they easily get put in their place, whatever mechanism, whatever form and whatever mechanism. So yeah, so I can imagine in other fields this would happen, but I don't think it's gone well beyond that. Yeah, in the area, you know, mainly the RMA I sort of deal with, and the areas I deal with, which is mainly, you know, with a high visibility of Maori, you know, councils and property owners and developers, lawyers. I've seen the changes quite rapidly. You know, they've picked up, especially I've been involved in 1 or 2 environment court cases appeals, and when you're successful, everybody learns fast.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I had a postgrad student from the Centre of Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Otago approached me wanting to use the work that we were doing out at Papua New Inlet as a way of investigating how archaeology can contribute to peace, which I found really, I've actually found that quite insulting, to be honest. And so I sort of reframed it back to this particular person around, you know, well, it's all well and good to sort of look at, at archaeology as a tool for achieving peace, and via like public archaeology was what she was thinking of, I'm assuming. But what are the outcomes that are going to benefit mana whenua from your ideas around this? If you're going to use our sites to sort of promote archaeology of an indigenous site as a tool for peace, then what's actually coming back to us? So I suppose it's just, it's probably just throwing questions like that back, to sort of like poke and prod at what the intent is behind it, and sort of illuminate that, if you're just using your own ideas and things from another culture, to sort of like, I don't know, it almost feels like, like wringing or extracting stuff out from another culture to meet your own ends, then that's tokenism right there. It's institutionalized racism. It's just all sorts of yuck. But I suppose it's just trying to be honest, but gentle, as hard as that is about the only way that you can sort of, put a stop to that sort of stuff. And quite often when you sort of throw that back at people and start, trying to dig into, well, actually what benefit is that going to have to mana whenua, they often go away, I find.
I agree with all that. I think, even just looking around at the industry, the lack of representation for, Maori and Pacifica kind of speaks to the dangers of tokenism, because there's so few that it's, perhaps beneficial for people to have those voices in their organisations, or to throw them in there conveniently. But I think it needs to be, sort of a piece of systemic structural kind of change if you're going to avoid those kinds of issues. You need to actually be trying to bring people through the system so that they can see both sides of the archaeology. Otherwise, it just doesn't work, I don't think.
Awesome. And so I think this follows on to the next question. Do you see any evidence that New Zealand universities are decolonizing their archaeology curriculum, or the curriculum around heritage and related fields? And Mana, do you want to start this one, and then go to Des, then Rachel, then Gena?
Not really. To be honest, I mean, if, I don't know. I don't think so. I think the scope of what we learn at university is very narrow. And looking back on my own education, no, it hasn't been decolonised, whatever that entails. But there's a lot of progress to be made.
From your perspective as a student who's gone through the whole undergrad to postgrad sort of, what would you want to see from your point of view as a step towards that?
I don't know. I guess maybe one way of doing that is more cross-disciplinary engagement with maybe the Maori Studies department and the Pacific Studies department would be a good move. I've seen, I tutored the Pacific Archaeology paper a few years ago, and from what I understand, they've had declining numbers over the last few years of Pacifica in that class. And, I don't think it's, I mean, it could be for any number of reasons, but, it's not that encouraging to see Pacifica going to other places and not coming to archaeology. So I think we need to find ways to stop that from happening and make it more diverse. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Mana. Unfortunately, the field of archaeology it started off back in the 60s, very narrow, and it hasn't changed. And it's not very inclusive. And it hasn't, and that's a reflection on the teaching institutions. You know, they've kept the same, I think, what's it, historic archaeology, you know, there's a big interest in there, people working in that, but outside of that, it's a really huge hole. But Gena's familiar with it. Yeah, the Hawaiian, what's happening with Hawaiian archaeologists, it blows me away. And it's only recent. When I was there in '84 and I was at the Bishop Museum, there was only one archaeologist, and I was Muppet, and she worked with Sinoto. But I've seen since, and then in 2003, I was at a World Archaeological Congress, and then all these indigenous students, and then there was Kathy Kawelu there. She's just doing a master's, and then now she's teaching in the Big Island, and she's running a program, and then they're really orientated about making, that's the Hawaiian, and there's a lot of students they put it out, and they emphasize about being Hawaiian and doing archaeology that works for them. But, you know, and not exclusively from the wider field, and that's what I found with the, and the international, it's mainly the, you know, America, Canada, and Australia, is that indigenous archaeology is backed up by high-profile white archaeologists. Here, yeah, it's just, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that has been said so far. I don't see any sign of archaeology being decolonised in the universities and the way it's being taught at all. Have heard horror stories from within my own iwi of archaeologists straight out of university and being sent to work on sites retrieving kōiwi tangata, and have got no idea about, you know, about just even the most basic of tikanga and working in those sites. Yeah, that's just really, really alarming in my opinion. Yeah, and I also I get really concerned that there is still a number of Pākehā archaeologists teaching about how to work with Māori down here in Ōtepoti, and that, you know, as Māori archaeologists, quite often we're not sort of given that same sort of credibility unless there is a Pākehā archaeologist backing us up.
I think fundamentally our universities are still institutionally racist. That's the structure that they're operating in, and I don't think we can expect them to decolonize themselves, and the only way forward is for us to create our own place for our own people. So the stuff that Des and I have been exploring with our whanaunga is how do we support indigenous archaeology ourselves as indigenous people, and how do we have rangatiratanga and take control of that, look after our people, but still get the benefit of the letters after your name, which is why you're at the university, right? You're not necessarily there to get all the great mātauranga, because that's going to come in lots of different ways. So don't go to Waikato University. Don't go to any university, come on.
Also, okay, so a lot of good points raised, and this ties into another question that's been submitted through from from our responses, which was the pull within archaeology towards a rigorously scientific process appears to place it at odds with indigenous worldviews. Is it possible to bring each perspective to the table to share, and does it involve cognitive dissonance? And I feel this has already been touched on just now as well. So I guess
oh yeah, no, I was just thinking about it, but I think to me, you know, with my background, I have no issue about science and knowledge that comes from science, because I'm deeply embedded in Maori knowledge, you know, and I see that as really important. But I think the thing is, and it's always lurking there, is we have this word tikanga, is that where the archaeologist tramples our tikanga and relating, and I think that's where the disjunct is. You know, it's the individual values a person has, and then, you know, how do they respect or behave with other cultures, or the cultures or the living descendants of the ancestors they are engaging with. To me, that's where the dissonance comes from.
And feel free to jump in, whoever would like to, at this, the panelists. Maybe we'll go Rachel, and then go to Mana. Oh, sorry, then Gena, then Mana.
Yeah, I find that quite hard to sort of answer, I suppose. At times, I don't really see any sort of dissonance between matauranga and archaeology. But then other times it's sort of really glaring as well. I suppose the site where I've been working at for the last wee while at Papua New Inlet, we unearthed a waka there a few years ago. And I suppose it's a really good example of the, you know, not seeing a dissonance between archaeology and matauranga, and that within our hapu, there's a really well-known story about some conflict going on over at Papua New Inlet that resulted in some waka being smashed up. And so unearthing this waka and then excavating and finding that it's, you know, the tauihu and the taurapa, the bow and the stern had been broken off. I mean, that was like a classic example of like, woohoo, is actually seeing all these stories like coming to life in front of us. But then, yeah, and then other things, I suppose, like, yeah, ideas around ecological or evolutionary ecological theory, and the whole idea of like, you know, optimal foraging and resource patch and so on and so forth. And that's probably the biggest dissonance that I see with archaeology, because that sort of, you know, it removes any sort of notion of agency or sort of, you know, just even like just culture from looking at the, you know, the actions of our tupuna down here, and just sort of relegates, you know, people and their culture and their values and belief systems and everything just into sort of economic zoological units, which is about as dissonant as you can possibly get from matauranga.
You'll have to ask them, Patricia.
I can't remember who I suggested for it. I think Mana and then Gena. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I don't know, like, I think there's sort of a lot to unpack in that kind of question. So
That's
I won't go into depth or anything, but I think that it's really important to understand where, I guess, the idea of science sits, you know, like the sort of colonial underpinnings that privilege that kind of information in society, and why people often give weight to that when really, you know, you should be looking at all forms of knowledge as in an equitable way, I guess, because they all have things to offer. But I mean, there's literature around whether or not those two things can be integrated and how people should go about doing that. And I think it's really important if you are going to try to do that, that you do it in a very conscientious way, because you don't want to say, look, I'm going to do this archaeological work and I'm going to engage with, some form of indigenous knowledge, but then sort of just take parts of that knowledge out to answer an archaeological question. That's not solving anything. It's probably making problems worse. So, yeah, we need to be informed and, discuss it and I guess work towards using all forms of knowledge in productive ways, I guess.
I think there's some really good examples where we've got traditional kōrero that's lined up with like seismic events, so I think there are places where mātauranga Māori have led the kōrero into the science field, and it can come both ways. I love getting technical information, but maybe it's the interpretation. There's an element of interpretation in all things that we do, and we're all a bit creative. And so I suspect that area of interpretation where someone says, and therefore we all are like this, that is the area that is too blurry and is too black and white at the same time. So that's when people step over each other's worldviews. And I think if we acknowledge that we all have different worldviews, and that sometimes our mātauranga is at a time and a place where we can connect and explain, and sometimes we're not, then we can be respectful of each other. And maybe that's the fundamental part, is being respectful both ways, and we don't necessarily get that.
And with that question, what are your recommendations, recommended best practices for graduate students and early scholars when collaborating with Indigenous peoples, such as resource speakers and authorship as well? And Rachel, if you would like to start that one off, then Des, then Gena, then Mana.
Okay. I think probably the most basic out of all those best practices is have an understanding of the tikanga of those people. That's absolute most basic, but you see lacking all the time. And other than that, allowing space for their voices to be heard and amplifying if necessary. I think that for a lot of hapu and iwi, and I'm not, this may be the same all around the world, the experiences they've had through colonization, and then through cultural heritage as a tool of colonization, means that sometimes just sort of sit back and listen to the experts with quotation marks, because you can't see me doing it. Whereas, if you actually sort of like dig down, they've got a lot to sort of contribute in terms of, deeper understandings of things. Yeah. So, for me, yeah, I suppose recommended best practice is making sure that those people are on the same level as you. So, in terms of decision making, in terms of contribution to any publications or reports, not ending up being, an acknowledgement at the end of the paper in italics. Yeah.
Thinking about the question, I think any graduate student who's never gone through a course in, like in Aotearoa dealing with Maori, have had no experience, no exposure, and then expect to go and work with a hapu iwi or community, they'll soon that's the worst case scenario. So in the late 90s, for 3 years, I taught in the landscape architecture program at Unitec, and then I was sort of told to take all the first year students to a marae, which they did. And then so I turned it around, and then I said to them, I prepared for them, you're going to a marae, you're going to learn a lot by being on the marae, the local kaumātua and other people are going to engage with you, but you have to give something back. And then so being landscape architects, even first years, they did projects. And then people responded, but it's just that developing a relationship is really key. Developing a relationship and say you want to work for people. You know, there's a number of different elements, but yes, just sending graduate students or others with absolutely no background to me is a no-no. They've got to be, you know, they've got to have some experience, some background. And a willingness, you know, to understand the context and the role and what they can give. And I always like, sort of saying to students, you go to a community, you got to give back. Yeah.
So that ties into the next question. How should we be having these discussions within our own networks and in our respective departments as well? Des, would you like to start that one off? And then
well, I'm just thinking, you know, for years, I suppose the decolonization program has been treaty workshops and stuff like that. And I haven't seen any archaeologists, because I suppose because of what they do is actually becoming better archaeologists and dealing with Maori community, iwi and hapu. You know, I don't see any training programs or anything. And you know, and there's a whole lot of areas been going on for years, and it hasn't happened in archaeology.
Gena, then maybe Rachel and Mana?
So I think just following on from what Des said before about learning respect and reciprocity and having that in action. I mean, that's what Des was talking about with his students. Becoming that needs to become a standard. So I suppose for me, my focus is on supporting indigenous archaeologists and kaitiaki in the work they do, which, you know, we're in an unbalanced playing field, and we need I believe we need a network that is active and supports indigenous peoples and their kaitiakitanga and their archaeology. And equally, I think that all students in Aotearoa should understand the place that they live in, no matter what country they come from. All students in Aotearoa, that should just be something that happens at primary school and at secondary school. And so by the time you get to high school, you understand those things. And if you are new to Aotearoa, it should be part of your induction into this place, is that this is who the tangata whenua are, and this is the tangata whenua of your actual place, because we are all quite different peoples and nations and have different ways that we like to work, and it should become, you know, so it's much bigger than archaeology. I think is what I'm saying is decolonization has to be a lifelong Aotearoa-wide everybody program, way of living.
Tautoko. Yeah. So for me, I suppose too, it's about modelling how I want to see things being done, and just advocating. I mean, I've talked to a number of students through the Department of Otago over the last few years, and all of them are crying out for, you know, for being able to work in a more decolonised way, and to be able to go out into the field and work with Māori communities and be a lot more sort of understanding of how to do that and how to do it in a way that that doesn't trample on the mana of those communities. So I suppose just advocating back at that university level for, you know, these sorts of things to be included in programs. I mean, I'm not sure about Auckland, but it still really blows me away that at Otago, you can get through an entire undergrad and then through masters and everything without ever doing, ever having to do any papers or any sort of experience in working with Māori at all. Must be the last profession to still do that.
Yeah, I used to find it really weird when I was a student working on excavation, and we're sitting there having lunch or having a bit of discussion, and people sitting next to me, Parker students or whatever, and I'm the first Māori that I've engaged with, and I just kind of, what are you people? But that was a really, all middle class people go and do archaeology, trendy thing, but yeah, it's it's what we're saying is you got to engage with people. You got to, you got to really know and be part with them, especially in Aotearoa.
Yeah, I think like for me, it's kind of an interesting one working in Samoa, because I was born and raised in New Zealand and I'm half Samoan. So I've had ongoing, I guess I go back and forth between Samoa, and I have for my whole life. But I'm not like entrenched in Samoa. I don't practice it on a daily basis, but I understand a lot of the customs that you're expected to meet when you go to Samoa. But, I see tons of people in universities or academia who are writing about these places, but, probably have no idea about that side of things. So I'm constantly navigating my own self-awareness around how I engage with my own people, and always trying to be better because I think I can be. But I think it's really important for other people to be thinking about that too when they're going through university.
Okay, and then I think it's a nice point to ask. What are the most critical changes that we must make to face the future effectively for this discipline and for the heritage sector as well? And I think we'll start off this time with Rachel, and then go to Mana, then Gena, then Des.
Yeah, to me, it just keeps coming back to how archaeologists are being trained at university. And yeah, I suppose also sort of looking at some of the legislation that we have in this country that sort of governs how heritage and archaeology are dealt with. Yeah, just from that university level, just putting things into programs which actually, equip grads to be able to go out and work with communities. But I also think we need to take a look at the legislation as well. The Protected Objects Act and the Pouhere Act just really favour the other side, so to speak. For example, the Protected Objects Act, which sort of governs, how taonga tūturu are dealt with, whether it's been, fined by a member of the public, or, that's been uncovered during an excavation. It sort of governs how that is responded to in terms of its long-term, ownership and custody and so on. And just often find, that archaeologists down here, almost by, default, always write down, that any taonga tūturu that are uncovered during, monitoring of a site during development or whatever, will go into an institution. And so having to push back all the time that, actually the Protected Objects Act says, custody can go to, a registered finder. All of our hapu down here are registered collectors, sorry, not registered finders. All of our hapu down here are registered collectors. What's stopping them from, having custody of those taonga while ownership's determined through the land court? And why is it that archaeologists that are making those decisions all the time? I mean, this should be, a two-way thing. So sort of, just going back to those sort of fundamentals and just sort of looking at how they're actually being practiced, and where changes should be made to enable communities to have more authority and, you know, more ownership over what's actually happening on the ground, would be a huge step forward.
I think it was Mana next.
Yeah.
Sorry about
That's all
that.
right.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that could change. And I think I'll only bring up one point that I want to change, because you could probably go on forever about this. You know, it'd be really nice to see just more Pacifica and Maori in archaeology, like, and finding ways to attract them somehow, you know, because we kind of have to ask ourselves why there are so few, and, you know, and then figure out a way to change that. And you know, it probably relates to a whole bunch of things, but it's just got to be better, you know. And I think that's one way that we can move towards having more voices and more rounded interpretations within the community. Yeah.
I would really like to see iwi and hapu research being the priority for universities, and that our students are corralled to iwi and hapu in their projects so that the research benefits our actual community, and that the relationships are built with actual iwi and hapu, and that they are I mean, to me, that's what rangatiratanga is. Here's the research that I want. I've got a massive list. Come to me. I've got heaps. Who's going to do it, and who's going to do it in a way so that I get to retain some sort of control over it and partnership in the process. I think that will change some of the dynamics, and I think it will change the relationship of our young people in particular wanting to come into archaeology, if they can see actually iwi and hapu have aspirations in this area. They do have research that they want completed. You can go to your own iwi and do that research, or you can go to another iwi and do that research, and grow our own people and everybody else at the same time.
Yeah, I follow what the line Mana's taking, and I think basically to have more Maori and Pacific Island people in, you got to have a program that they feel they own it or part of it, and you just the current what I call mainstream what they teach at Auckland, Otago doesn't meet our needs, and our needs. And then I've been working with a couple of younger Maori students at university, and I've been sort of telling them you need to understand whakapapa. You need to understand all the different iwi and hapu. You know, have a good basic understanding, and having an ability, and I suppose a training to be able to how to pick up who tangata whenua, all that. And yeah, having this background, a background of a foundation of Maori knowledge, and it's based on history, and whakapapa is quite important, or genealogy, because that you can understand what iwi and hapu say about themselves, or you know, who they identify, who their ancestors, and then I think, like advising for Pākehā students, go and do a paper in Maori studies. You know, if the anthropology or archaeology department ain't doing it, but I actually I've examined all the different courses Maori studies are putting out, and I haven't really seen anything that fits into be a good program for students who want to sort of follow archaeology. But yeah, so I encourage students to look at Maori studies, or look at other papers that they can get a Maori content, which is lacking in archaeology.
Kia ora, Des. I think you've actually touched on one of the last questions I wanted to pose to you, which was what can the next generation of learners do to get involved in telling their own stories and controlling their own narratives? And open to all panelists if you have any input on this. Maybe you start, Des, if you wanted to, since you just touched on this already.
Yeah, oh, well, I just talk, I'm not teaching at Waikato anymore. I was teaching a Maori heritage paper, but what I was focusing on was at stage 3, stage 4. What I was really focusing is developing good research skills about, so I was doing projects and then how to use the archive, how to use all sorts of information and do a project on themselves, where they come from, you know, using survey plans, a whole range of stuff. But yeah, so just about, and that's the area I'm highly skilled at, you know, research, you know, just how to find, how to create narrative from archival or from all sorts of sources.
Cool. Gena, and then Rachel and Mana.
Yep, I think what Des is talking about is super duper important and would be really useful for your own development, and also being a kaitiaki for your own people. Go and be a kaitiaki for your own iwi. Lots of iwi are always looking for kaitiaki over the summer, so there's a really good summer holiday job, but also it gets you into real, actual, this is what field work really, really looks like, and it's hard work. So I think it's a good way of starting.
Yeah, I'm looking at this question, and I'm probably getting more hung up on the telling their own stories and controlling their own cultural narratives rather than the next generation of learners. I suppose I'm looking at that next generation of learners in terms of the next generation of kaitahu learners from my own perspective. And so, yeah, just getting involved, allow yourself to be dragged along to things or finding opportunities to go and do things. There's nothing like going and being hands-on to actually build that passion and excitement and getting out there, and just be confident to actually tell your own stories. As soon as other people start trying to talk over the top of you, just talk louder. Yeah, and research, and talk to your kaumātua.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I think the next generation will bring a lot of insight if we can attract more indigenous students in archaeology, and they should build back themselves to bring their knowledge into the industry, because it'll make the discipline a lot stronger. So I think diversity, new ideas, different ways of seeing things are really just a good starting point for that.
I think we've had some questions come through, and because it's almost 7:45 and we're of the time, I think we'll address some of these questions. So Gerard O'Regan, kia ora Gerard, has asked, we sometimes see the discussion talking of tangata whenua kaitiaki being one side and archaeologists being the other, but what about the narratives of tauiwi new ages, which quite often questions who was here first and have racist undertones? These don't get tackled outright by academia or by CRM archaeology, but they get heard a lot in the community. These are misrepresentations of archaeology. So whose job is it to address these, and how? Des, would you like to start this one? Then
I was just thinking about it. I remember when I was young and in a rural community, you know, the local Pākehā farmers, and they always talked about giant ancestors, you know, they come across these bones and burial caves and that, they are 7 foot, but it's the same underlying theme, is that those ancestors aren't the same. They're much better quality people than the people are today. I suppose it's just, you know, communication, PR, putting information out there and making public announcements. Yeah, it's always been there, and it never goes around, never goes away. And then in the age of Donald Trump, you know, these things seem to be trending, a popular trend. just have to deal with it.
Yeah, I suppose I see that as I view that as being everyone's responsibility. Have often run into some of those kind of myths as well, just sort of being perpetrated by, or perpetuated by archaeologists down here as well. Still quite common to find archaeologists writing that Māori weren't active in Central Otago, or they didn't occupy Central Otago, and yet that's not right according to our kōrero. That whole area is full of ara tāwhiti or traditional pathways and nohoaka and mahika kai places. And the museum here is chock full of talka from Central Otago. But anyway, that's a wee digression. So I view it as being, it's archaeologists' responsibility to put things right. It's the iwi's responsibility to put themselves out there and make sure that their kōrero and histories are just as loud as some of those other bollocky things that get put out there. And it's the wider community's responsibility to educate themselves and put that stuff to bed.
Okay, and we've got another question here from Raquel Sterrett. He's asking, how can we improve the rate of preservation of Māori sites? And so this one's open to everyone.
Better legislation.
Yeah, and more funding.
And oh yes, any other? Okay. I think, oh yeah, and another one from Raquel is, how does the early archaeological investigations, in brackets antiquarian grave robbers, pre-carbon dating impact the archaeological timeline of Aotearoa? How can we reassess those sites and the dates that may influence the archaeological timeline? Quite a technical question, this one.
As an archaeologist, I've followed radiocarbon dating process. There's a lot of debate. It has been in the past and is today, but a key for me is I use whakapapa, tupuna time. Two different, and that the whakapapa, tupuna time gives me an understanding of people and place, and archaeology, the radiocarbon dates, that's, I put on my scientific hat. But as we know with archaeology, it requires a lot of resourcing to get good information, research, investigation, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, and this one is from Caroline Phillips. How do you feel about the inequality of credibility between the archaeologists and mana whenua? And this one's open again. Whoever would like to first take this one, and then everyone and the other panelists can interject.
Great question. So we spend a lot of time ensuring that we're collaborating as equal partners to start right at the very beginning that way. And so I don't know if we're ever going to be able to change people's institutional racism and therefore their view that mātauranga Māori is not a valid science quickly. We will change it, but we won't necessarily be able to change it quickly. But I think that as Indigenous archaeologists supporting tangata whenua to step up and be collaborators and equal partners to tell their story, so that their story is recorded, so that their whakapapa is recorded, and that we have a story that has multiple dimensions to it, is an exciting way forward. And it requires you to be a stroppy wahine tō like Rachel.
And we have another question from Caroline Phillips. might be more specific to Rachel, Des and Gena, but Mana, you might have some things as well. It's, as a Maori archaeologist, how do you feel about destroying sites under the HNZPT authority and complying with the Protected Objects Act?
That's always a tough one. It's, yeah. I suppose when those authorities are in place to monitor or to excavate a site because it's about to be destroyed due to infrastructure works or property development works or that sort of thing, it's really tough. I don't know that I can sort of answer that really objectively, I suppose. But on the other hand, it's not all about destroying sites as well. I mean, having an HNZ, an authority to go and destroy a site could actually be more about, salvaging a site that's about to disappear into the ocean. And that's about, that's about manaakitanga and kaitiakitanga and looking after, the remains of the tupuna there before they get washed out. So I suppose there's, two different feelings around that. And complying with the Protected Objects Act, I think you can totally comply with the Protected Objects Act and still, assert your mana and rakaterataka within that. It's about how other people are interpreting and carrying that out, in my opinion.
That's why in the mid-90s I stopped being a consultant archaeologist and doing authorities to destroy, because there's no balance in management. So since then I've been focusing on management. You can have management, but it doesn't really happen. But it needs the role of tangata whenua to identify, have a process to identify which areas and which sites are important to them. And but I say I've seen, like, Papua Moa is one example. That's the area I'm familiar with, and Tauranga. Other areas like Auckland, just it's still continuous, it's intensive. And I asked the question in the 90s, what's going to remain in 100 years for the next, for the generation at that time, for them to be able to see or visualize. So so that's the area I prefer to place myself in. But as I've sort of reiterated that the Act, and it goes back to the legacy of Roger Green, protecting the the archaeological record. So to me, it has to be addressed.
Right. And so we have, another question is, I think, would be here, what is the importance of archaeology today in the context of Aotearoa in contemporary society, where there are a diverse range of cultures in what is still a colonial setting? And Mana, do you want to take this one? And then Des, and then Rachel?
I mean, I think it's an important tool. There's some important stories from archaeology, and then even touching back on Gerard's question, we do have valuable things to offer to at least set the record straight on some things. And then I think if we can strengthen archaeology by having a more inclusive discipline, then that's one step in the right direction. Because I guess New Zealand's struggling with colonialism in a lot of different areas. So I think archaeology has a lot to offer, and we can make some progress if we go in the right direction.
Can you tell me the question again? I just got a bit distracted.
That's all right. It's what is the importance of archaeology today in the context of Aotearoa in contemporary society, where there is a diverse range of cultures in what is still a colonial setting?
Well, the reference to the range of cultures, archaeology is about Maori, for so many centuries, and then you've got the colonial period, which is Pākehā. I'm not sure about, there's been the Chinese gold miners in central Otago. There's a few, they've got a long history, but I think for Maori, archaeology has a lot going, but it ain't happening.
I think the contemporary society where that's us all day, every day. We want to know where we've come from, whoever we are, and we want to know about the place that we live in. So I don't know if it really matters what culture you are, the desire to know about the place that you live in. That's what archaeology can support us with.
Yeah, total. It's about our shared experiences as human beings. Yeah, it's all the same issues, same cares and dramas. But going back to what Des was saying, sort of making that distinction between Māori archaeology and colonial or historical archaeology, I suppose that's just a wee opportunity for me to push something I get really angry about in terms of, some of that work that goes on out there. And that sort of dichotomy, or line in the sand where pre this time, it's Māori archaeology and we care about, we go and consult with mana whenua for their views or whatever. And then post this line, it's all Pākehā and Māori are now invisible. Forgetting that, Māori didn't die out in, 1840, and our culture didn't cease to exist in 1840. Māori was still actively participating in communities and within society. So, when you're looking at historical archaeology, don't forget that Māori participated in that world as well. So anyway, kia ora.
And what a mic drop. So just the final question before we end, before we close the panel, do you have any parting words or recommendations for young aspiring students, those in their early career stages, or to general public that have a general interest and have tuned into this talk today? Rachel, would you like to start? Then go to Mana, then Des and Gena.
Be confident, and just go out and develop relationships and learn as much as you can, and don't take everything for granted.
I'd say the same, and also just be open-minded, be careful what you read. Don't go down some rabbit hole. There's a lot of stuff out there that's misleading, and it's without racist. It may not come across that way if you look at it at face value, but a lot of the material out there is like that. So it's good to talk to people about these things, and if they have opinions to offer, listen to them, and just think about it.
Museums are great places. Getting to the actual inside, behind the scenes part of the museum is, if you ever get that opportunity, take it, and that connect to your iwi and your hapu. If you're Maori, connect to your people, go to the wānanga, learn the things, have the opportunity to go out into the whenua with your people.
Well, I was just going to say, in parks, reserves, there's a lot of places. My pet topic, is accessible, just to go there, and then there's a lot of meaning once you click into it, just where they locate it. And to me, that's a good starting point.
So I think that's all we have time for now, and we might draw this to an end. So just on behalf of the New Zealand Archaeological Association, I want to especially thank our panelists, Dr. Des Kahotea, Gena Moses-Te Kani, Mana Laumea, and Rachel Wesley. Thank you so much for investing your time and your energy out of your incredibly busy schedules, I can imagine, and partaking in this very important kōrero. And also thank you to our host, Zach McIver, Kat Watson as well for coordinating this event with me, and to Jessie Garland, who has been live tweeting this event for us. A special thank you to our Kaupapa Māori advisory group, and especially Dr. Jared O'Regan, who helped bring together our panel guests and our NZAA Council for their ongoing support and progressing this kaupapa. And last but not least, but thank you to our audience. Thank you for everyone who has engaged today in this important kōrero. And the response to this webinar has been overwhelming and inspiring, and we hope that everyone who has attended has gained something from this discussion to help you continue these conversations in your respective communities and circles, whether you have a general interest as a member of the public or in your respective career path at whatever stage of education you might be at. And these conversations, as we can tell from the discussion today, are definitely not over, and they're part of ongoing work. But we are so grateful for everyone who has attended the session. And we've recorded this discussion as mentioned at the start, and we'll be post-processing this with NZAA and our panelists to work on the information gained from this important discussion, and we'll keep you posted on this. Once again, thank you to everyone who has participated, and I will now ask our panel, Kai Matua Des, to close this discussion.
Nā reira, tēnei te tuku mihi atu ki au koutou, I mātaketaki e whakarongo ana. Te mihi kei nā tangata e te whakatū e nei pai kōrero, nā reira karunu nā kōrero, noho ora mai rā koutou I o koutou wā kāinga, nā reira kia ora nā tātou.
Kia ora. Thank you, Stefano. Pō Mārie.